I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The dream felt so real. I was trapped in a maze-like house, each room revealing a new horror from my past. But when I looked out the window, my blood ran cold. There, in the field across from our home, stood the exact same house from my nightmare. It wasn't there yesterday, and somehow I knew it was waiting for me. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off as I stared out the window. The sun had set, casting long shadows across our quiet country home. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the familiar scent of her homemade lasagna wafting through the air. Our kids, Emily and Jack, were sprawled on the living room floor, absorbed in their homework. It was a scene of perfect normalcy, one we'd lived 1,000 times before. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. We sat down to dinner, laughing and sharing stories about our day. Sarah told us about a difficult patient at the hospital, while Emily proudly showed off her latest art project. Jack, ever the jokester, had us in stitches with his impression of his math teacher. As I helped Sarah clear the table, I glanced out the window again. That's when I saw it. Across the field, where there had always been nothing but open space and a few old oak trees, stood a house. It was large, Victorian in style, with gables and turrets that seemed to twist unnaturally against the darkening sky. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. "Sarah," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come look at this." She joined me at the window, her eyes widening as she took in the sight. That wasn't there this morning, was it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I shook my head, unable to form words. We called the kids over, and soon all four of us were pressed against the glass, staring at the impossible structure that had appeared in our field. Emily was the first to break the silence. "Can we go look at it?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "No," Sarah and I said in unison, perhaps a bit too quickly. The sudden change in our environment had thrown us off balance, and I could feel a creeping unease settling into my bones. We tried to go about our evening routine as normal, but our eyes kept drifting to the windows, drawn to the looming presence across the field. The kids were unusually quiet as they got ready for bed, and I could see the worry etched on Sarah's face as she tucked them in. Back in the living room, Sarah and I sat in tense silence. "What do you think it is?" she finally asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe it's some kind of elaborate prank, or a movie set." We tossed theories back and forth, each more unlikely than the last. Finally, we decided to investigate in the morning. "It'll all make sense in the daylight," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Sarah. As we climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a mistake by waiting. The house seemed to loom larger in my mind, its presence a dark weight pressing down on us. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that we'd wake up and find a perfectly logical explanation. But as I drifted off to sleep, a chill ran down my spine. In the distance, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of laughter coming from across the field. Our troubles, I feared, were only just beginning. Morning arrived, bringing with it a fog that seemed to cling to the strange house. We approached cautiously, our footsteps muffled in the damp grass. With each step, the structure before us became more wrong. How could a building violate the very laws of physics? I led the way, with Sarah close behind me. The kids trailed a few steps back, their excitement from last night replaced by a palpable nervousness. As we drew closer, the house's bizarre features came into sharp focus. The walls seemed to undulate, as if they were breathing. Windows appeared and disappeared at random, their shapes warping like funhouse mirrors. "Dad, look at the roof," Emily whispered, tugging at my sleeve. I followed her gaze upward and felt my stomach lurch. The roof twisted impossibly, forming spirals and loops that shouldn't have been able to support their own weight. It reminded me of those optical illusions you see in art books, but this was no trick of perspective. This was real. We circled the house, each side revealing new impossibilities. On one wall, bricks phased in and out of existence, leaving gaping holes that sealed themselves moments later. Another side appeared to be made entirely of glass, but when I reached out to touch it, my hand passed right through, as if nothing was there. "It's like that upside-down house in Poland," Sarah murmured, her voice tight with disbelief. "But this is so much worse." Jack, always the brave one, stepped closer to peer through one of the shifting windows. "I can see inside," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "but it doesn't match the outside. It's like it's bigger on the inside, way bigger. I felt a chill run down my spine. The house seemed to be watching us, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my family and run, but curiosity held us in place. I found myself wondering what it would be like to step inside to explore the impossible spaces within. Should we try to go in? I asked, not sure if I wanted anyone to say yes. Sarah gripped my arm tightly. I don't think that's a good idea, she said, her eyes wide with fear. This place, it's not natural. It reminds me of those urban legends, like the murder house in Los Angeles. What if something terrible happened here? As if in response to her words, a low groan emanated from the house. The walls shuddered, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw faces pressing against the windows, their expressions twisted in agony. We need to leave, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. Now. We backed away slowly, unable to tear our eyes from the nightmarish structure. With each step, I felt a growing sense of relief, as if we were breaking free from some unseen force that had been holding us in place. As we reached the edge of our property, I turned to take one last look. The house stood there, silent and impossible, a blight on the peaceful landscape of our home. But something had changed. The front door, which had been closed moments ago, now stood wide open, and in the darkness beyond, I could have sworn I saw something move. We hurried back inside our own home, locking the doors behind us. The sense of safety I usually felt within these familiar walls was gone, replaced by a creeping dread. Because now I knew the truth. The nightmare hadn't stayed in the field. It had followed us home. Have you ever woken up in your own bed in your own room and felt like something was off? That's how it started for us. Subtle at first, barely noticeable. But as the hours ticked by, the wrongness grew, and with it, our terror. We thought we'd left the nightmare behind in that field, but we were so wrong. It had followed us home, seeping into the walls of our sanctuary. I first noticed it when I went to grab a glass of water before bed. The kitchen felt different, larger somehow. The counters seemed just a bit too high, the fridge a touch too far away. I blinked hard, sure I was just tired, but the feeling persisted. Sarah felt it too. I heard her shuffling around in our bedroom, opening and closing drawers. "Honey," she called out, her voice tight with confusion. "Did you move my things?" I hadn't, of course, but when I walked in, I saw what she meant. The room had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The bed was angled wrong, the closet door just slightly off-center. We tried to laugh it off, to convince ourselves we were just spooked from earlier. But as the night wore on, the changes became impossible to ignore. The hallway stretched impossibly long, doors appearing where there shouldn't be any. I swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, always darting away when I turned to look. The kids noticed too. Emily came out of her room, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered, "my wall keeps moving." I wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, but I couldn't lie, because I saw it too, the subtle ripple of the wallpaper, like something was trying to push through from the other side. Jack was the bravest of us all. He suggested we try to leave, to get in the car and drive away. But when we reached for the front door, our hands passed right through it. We were trapped, just like in that impossible house across the field. Except now we were living the nightmare in our own home. I felt my heart pounding as panic set in. The familiar had become alien, and my mind struggled to make sense of it all. I remembered reading once about how the brain processes sudden changes in living spaces, how it can trigger a fight or flight response, leading to increased stress and paranoia. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. As the night wore on, the transformations grew more extreme. Staircases appeared where there had only been flat floor before. Rooms shifted and changed every time we blinked. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a sickening rhythm. And always, always there was that sense of being watched, of something waiting just out of sight. By morning, our house was unrecognizable. Gone was the cozy family home we'd loved for years. In its place stood a twisted labyrinth of impossible architecture and lurking shadows. We huddled together in what used to be our living room, now a cavernous space with a ceiling that vanished into darkness. "What's happening to us?" Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with fear. I wished I had an answer for her, for any of us. But as I looked around at the nightmare our home had become, I realized we were far beyond any rational explanation. We were trapped in a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of our ordeal. The walls seemed to whisper our deepest fears back to us. I've never been a superstitious man, but as I sat there in our twisted living room, I swear I could hear them. Soft murmurs at first, barely audible over our ragged breathing, but they grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't ignore them anymore. Sarah was the first to succumb to sleep. We'd been fighting it for hours, terrified of what might happen if we closed our eyes. But exhaustion won out in the end. I watched her eyelids flutter, her breathing slow, and then the screaming started. Her body went rigid, her face contorted in terror. "No, please," she whimpered. "Not the children. Take me instead." I tried to wake her, shaking her shoulders, calling her name, but she was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't reach. I remembered reading once about how the brain processes fear during sleep, how nightmares can feel more real than reality itself. But this was something else entirely. Sarah's eyes were open now, but unseeing. Tears streamed down her face as she battled invisible demons. "Sarah," I pleaded, "wake up, it's not real." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Whatever she was experiencing felt more real than anything we'd ever known. When she finally woke, gasping and shaking, I saw a haunted look in her eyes that chilled me to my core. "The hospital," she whispered. "All my patients, they were dead, and it was my fault." I held her close, trying to offer comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the house was testing us, probing for our weaknesses. Emily was next. She'd always been afraid of the dark, insisted on sleeping with a nightlight. But now, in this twisted version of our home, darkness seemed to seep from every corner. I heard her whimpering in her sleep, saw her small body curled into a tight ball. "The monsters," she cried out. "They're coming out of the walls." I rushed to her side, but it was like trying to pull her out of quicksand. The more I tried to wake her, the deeper she sank into her terror. Jack, my brave boy, tried to put on a strong face, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking, "what's happening to us?" I wished I had an answer for him, some way to explain the inexplicable, but all I could do was hold him close as the shadows seemed to grow longer around us. It wasn't long before Jack succumbed as well. His nightmare was different, a maze of endless corridors, each turn revealing a new horror. He thrashed in his sleep, calling out for help that never came. And then it was my turn. I fought it as long as I could, forcing my eyes to stay open. But in the end, exhaustion won out. As I felt myself slipping into darkness, I heard those whispers again, louder now, almost gleeful. "Welcome," they seemed to say. "We've been waiting for you." My nightmare was a patchwork of every fear I'd ever had. Losing my family, failing to protect them, being trapped and helpless. I ran through endless rooms, each one filled with horrors I couldn't bear to face. And always that sense of something watching, waiting. When I finally clawed my way back to consciousness, I found my family huddled around me. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with a shared understanding. We'd all experienced it now. The personalized terrors tailor-made to break us. "It knows," Sarah whispered. "It knows everything about us." And as I looked around at our once familiar home, now warped beyond recognition, I realized the true horror of our situation. This wasn't just a nightmare we could wake up from. This was our new reality. And somehow I knew it was only going to get worse. Sleep. It should have been our escape, our refuge from this waking nightmare. Instead, it became our greatest enemy. As exhaustion clawed at our minds, I knew we faced an impossible choice: stay awake and slowly lose our sanity, or succumb to sleep and feed the growing darkness. Either way, the house would win. We tried everything to stay awake. Sarah raided the medicine cabinet for caffeine pills while I brewed pot after pot of coffee. The kids, wide-eyed and trembling, huddled together on the couch, afraid to even blink. We talked, we sang, we played ridiculous games, anything to keep our minds active. But as the hours dragged on, I could feel the house's presence growing stronger. The walls seemed to pulse with a sickening rhythm, and shadows danced at the corners of my vision. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was trying to smother us into unconsciousness. "Dad," Emily whimpered, her small hand clutching mine. "I'm so tired. Can't we just sleep for a little bit?" I wanted to tell her yes, to promise her that everything would be okay, but the words stuck in my throat, because I knew what waited for us in our dreams. Jack was the first to fall. One moment he was sitting up, eyes glazed but open. The next, his head lolled to the side. and a small snore escaped his lips. Before I could even reach him, the screaming started. His body convulsed, face contorted in terror. "No, no, no," he cried out, fighting against invisible restraints. "Don't let them take me." Sarah and I tried to wake him, shaking his shoulders, calling his name. But it was like he was trapped behind a wall of glass, unreachable. And with each scream, each sob, I swear I felt the house grow stronger. The walls seemed to expand, the ceiling stretching higher. Shadows deepened, taking on almost solid forms. And all the while, that pulsing grew louder, more insistent. Like a heartbeat, like the house was alive and feeding. Emily was next, then Sarah. I watched helplessly as they were dragged into their own personal hells. My wife's face, usually so calm and composed, twisted into a mask of pure anguish. "I'm sorry," she sobbed in her sleep. "I'm so sorry. Please, forgive me." I fought sleep with everything I had. My eyes burned, my head pounded. The world around me began to warp and twist, reality blurring at the edges. I remembered reading once about the effects of sleep deprivation, how it can cause hallucinations, paranoia, even temporary psychosis. But this was different. This was something hungry, something that wanted us broken and afraid. In the end, exhaustion won out. I felt myself slipping, falling into a darkness deeper than any I'd ever known. And as consciousness faded, I heard it, a sound like laughter, cruel and triumphant. I don't know how long we were trapped in our nightmares. Time lost all meaning in that place of endless terror. When we finally clawed our way back to wakefulness, the house had changed again. Everything felt more twisted, more wrong. The walls dripped with a substance that looked disturbingly like blood. The air was thick with the stench of decay. And we were different too. I could see it in the hollow eyes of my family, the way they flinched at every shadow. Whatever the house had taken from us during those dreams, we would never get it back. "We have to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. We can't let it win." I nodded, feeling a desperate resolve building within me. We had to try, even if it seemed impossible. Because the alternative, staying here, letting this thing feed on our fear until there was nothing left, was unthinkable. "Okay," I said, gathering my family close. "We're getting out of here, no matter what it takes." Have you ever had that dream where you're running, but your legs feel like lead? Where no matter how hard you push, you can't seem to move fast enough? That's what it felt like, as we made our first attempt to escape. Only this was no dream, and the consequences of failure were all too real. The front door was right there, taunting us with its false promise of freedom. We could see it, almost touch it, but crossing that threshold proved impossible. As we approached, the hallway seemed to stretch impossibly long. With each step we took, our goal remained just out of reach. Sarah grabbed my hand, her palms slick with sweat. "John, something's wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's like the house doesn't want us to leave." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. The air around us felt thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was pushing against us. I glanced back at Emily and Jack, their faces pale with fear. We had to get them out of here, no matter what. "Maybe we can try a window," Jack suggested, his voice small but determined. We moved to the living room, where large bay windows usually offered a view of our peaceful front yard. But as we approached, the glass began to ripple like water. When I reached out to touch it, my hand passed right through, as if nothing was there at all. "This isn't possible," Sarah muttered, her scientific mind struggling to make sense of what we were seeing. "It defies all laws of physics." But the house didn't care about laws or logic. It seemed to shift and change with each passing moment, corridors twisting into impossible shapes, rooms appearing and disappearing at random. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like I was trapped in some kind of non-Euclidean nightmare. We tried every exit we could think of, the back door, the garage, even the small window in the upstairs bathroom. But each attempt was met with the same result, failure. The house always found a way to thwart us, to keep us trapped within its ever-changing walls. As the hours wore on, I could feel panic setting in. My heart raced, and I struggled to catch my breath. I remembered reading once about how being trapped can trigger a fight-or-flight response, causing all sorts of physiological reactions, but knowing that didn't make it any easier to bear. Emily started to cry, her small body shaking with sobs. "I want to go home," she whimpered. The cruel irony was that we were home, or at least what used to be our home. I pulled her close, trying to offer what comfort I could. "We'll find a way out, sweetie," I promised, even as doubt gnawed at my insides. "We just have to keep trying." But with each failed attempt, our hope dwindled. The house seemed to grow stronger, more malevolent. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and I swear I could hear whispers in the walls, mocking laughter at our futile efforts. As we huddled together in what used to be our kitchen, the truth finally sank in. We were well and truly trapped. This house, this impossible, nightmarish place, had become our prison, and I had no idea how we were going to escape. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his brave facade finally cracking. I looked at my family, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. "We regroup," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "We rest, we think, and we come up with a new plan. Because one way or another, we're getting out of here." But as I said those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. In fact, I had a sinking suspicion that it was only just beginning. I've always thought I knew my family inside and out. But as the house shifted around us, I saw something in their eyes I'd never noticed before, a flicker of long-buried terror. What secrets were we all hiding? And why did I have the sickening feeling that this house was about to drag them into the light? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This house wasn't just trying to scare us. It was forcing us to confront our deepest, darkest fears. The ones we'd spent years pushing down, pretending they didn't exist. I could see it in the way Sarah's hand shook, in the haunted look in Jack's eyes. We were all being stripped bare, our defenses crumbling. It started with Emily, my sweet little girl, always so bright and cheerful. But now, as we huddled in what used to be our living room, I saw her face go pale. Her eyes glazed over, seeing something none of us could. "No," she whimpered. "Please, don't leave me alone." I reached for her, but it was like she couldn't even see me. She was lost in her own personal hell. I remembered the day we'd found her, barely 2 years old, abandoned at a bus station. We'd promised her she'd never be alone again. But here she was, reliving that primal fear of abandonment. The air around Emily seemed to shimmer, and suddenly we could all see it, a vision of a little girl, crying and alone in a crowded place. I felt my heart breaking all over again. "Emily," I called out, my voice cracking. "We're here, we'll always be here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Emily blinked. She looked at us, really saw us, for the first time in what felt like hours. And then she burst into tears, throwing herself into our arms. As I held her, I felt something shift in the air around us, like the house had loosened its grip, just a little. Sarah was next. My brilliant, dedicated wife, always so composed. But now I saw her hands shaking as she pressed them against her temples. I can't save them all," she muttered, her eyes wild with panic. I knew what she was seeing. The patients she couldn't save, the lives that slipped away despite her best efforts. It was a burden she'd carried for years, one I'd never fully understood until now. The room filled with the sounds of beeping monitors, of flat lines and desperate cries for help. "Sarah," I said, taking her hands in mine, "you can't save everyone. But think of all the lives you have saved. All the people who are alive today because of you." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. And as she nodded, accepting this truth she'd always known but never truly believed, I felt another shift. The oppressive weight in the air lifted just a bit more. Jack was the last to face his demons, my brave boy always trying to be strong for everyone else. But now I saw the fear in his eyes as he stared at something only he could see. I'm not good enough," he whispered. The vision that appeared broke my heart. Jack, alone on a baseball field, missing catch after catch as his teammates jeered. It was a memory I'd almost forgotten, his first and only Little League game. He'd quit after that, never picking up a bat again. "Jack," I said, kneeling beside him, "you are more than enough. Your worth isn't measured by how well you catch a ball. It's measured by your kindness, your bravery, your heart." As Jack's shoulders straightened, as he looked at us with newfound confidence, I felt the house shudder around us. The walls seemed less solid, the shadows less dark. And I realized something crucial. By facing our fears, by confronting the darkness within ourselves, we were weakening the house's hold on us. I looked at my family, seeing them with new eyes. We'd all confronted our deepest fears, laid bare our most vulnerable selves. It had been terrifying, yes, but also cathartic. Like lancing a wound, letting the poison out so healing could begin. As we huddled together, I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe by facing our fears, by supporting each other through our darkest moments, we'd found the key to escaping this nightmare. The house had tried to break us, but instead, it had made us stronger. I squeezed Sarah's hand, meeting her eyes. I said slowly, I think we might have a way out. Sarah's eyes widened as she caught my meaning. A way out? But how? She whispered. As I opened my mouth to explain, a floorboard creaked behind us. We spun around, hearts racing, to find ourselves face to face with something that shouldn't exist, a door that hadn't been there moments ago, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and change as we watched. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the impossible door. It was like the house was responding to our realization, revealing another piece of its twisted puzzle. Should we? I started to ask, but the words died in my throat. Did we dare open it? Emily clutched my hand, her small fingers trembling. "Dad, I'm scared," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Jack, always the brave one, stepped forward. "We have to know," he said, his voice barely audible. "Maybe this is how we get out." I nodded, swallowing hard. With shaking hands, I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold to the touch, sending a jolt through my body. As I turned it, I heard a sound like distant whispers growing louder with each second. The door swung open, revealing not another room but a swirling vortex of memories. Our memories. I saw flashes of our lives, birthdays, arguments, quiet moments of joy and sorrow. But mixed in were other images, darker and more disturbing. People I didn't recognize, their faces twisted in terror. Strange, impossible landscapes that hurt my eyes to look at. "What is this?" Sarah gasped, her scientific mind struggling to make sense of what we were seeing. As we watched, transfixed, the images began to coalesce into a pattern. I felt a strange pressure in my head, like something was trying to communicate directly with my mind. And suddenly I understood. "It's not just a house," I said, my voice shaking. "It's alive, sentient, and it's been waiting for us." The others looked at me, fear and confusion in their eyes. I tried to explain what I was seeing, what I was feeling. It's like it feeds on emotions. On fear, yes, but also on love, on connection. It's been drawing people in for years, maybe centuries. Sarah's brow furrowed. "But why? What does it want?" As if in response to her question, a new series of images flashed before us. I saw the house as it had been originally, a simple structure, unremarkable, except for the faint glow that seemed to emanate from within. And then I saw people entering, families like our own, but instead of terror, I saw transformation. "It's trying to evolve," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "It needs us to grow, to become something more than it is." Jack's eyes widened. So all of this, the nightmares, the fear, it wasn't trying to hurt us. I shook my head, still struggling to process what I was seeing. No, it was testing us, pushing us to confront our deepest fears, our strongest emotions, because that's what it needs to change. Emily tugged on my sleeve. "But Dad, is it good or bad?" I looked down at her, wishing I had a simple answer. "I don't think it's either, sweetie. It's just different, trying to survive, to become something new." As the vortex of images began to fade, I felt a sense of purpose settling over me. We had a choice to make. We could fight against this entity, try to escape or destroy it, or we could work with it, help it achieve whatever strange evolution it was striving for. I looked at my family, seeing the same mix of fear and determination in their eyes that I felt in my own heart. I said slowly, "I think we might have found our way out. But it's not going to be easy." Sarah nodded, squeezing my hand. "Nothing worth doing ever is," she said, a hint of her old strength returning to her voice. As we stepped back from the door, I felt the house shift around us. But this time it wasn't threatening. It was expectant, waiting to see what we would do next. And I knew that whatever happened, our lives would never be the same again. The house waited, its very walls seeming to hold their breath. We stood there, a family united by terror, yet something had changed. Could our greatest weakness, our love for each other, become our most powerful weapon against this otherworldly entity? I looked at Sarah, her face etched with determination despite the fear in her eyes. "We've been fighting this thing alone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe that's been our mistake all along." Emily clutched my hand, her small fingers trembling. "What do you mean, Dad?" I knelt down, meeting her gaze. "Remember how we faced our fears together? How it felt when we supported each other?" She nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "That's it," Sarah breathed, catching on. "The house feeds on our fear, our isolation. But when we come together, we become stronger," Jack finished, his voice steadier than it had been in days. I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. This was it, our way out. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. We'd have to confront our deepest fears, not just individually, but as a family. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's form a circle. Hold hands. Whatever happens, whatever we see or feel, we don't let go. We face it together." As our hands linked, I felt a surge of energy pass through us. The house seemed to react, the walls rippling and shifting around us. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, trying to draw my attention away from my family. I heard Emily whimper, saw Jack's jaw clench. Sarah's hand tightened on mine. "Focus," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Remember, we're in this together." Suddenly, the room filled with visions our worst fears made manifest. I saw Sarah surrounded by patients she couldn't save, heard Jack's teammates jeering at him. Emily's cries of abandonment tore at my heart. But this time we didn't face these horrors alone. I squeezed Sarah's hand, reminding her of all the lives she had saved. Jack straightened his shoulders as I whispered words of encouragement. Emily's grip relaxed as we surrounded her with love. With each fear we faced down together, I felt the house's grip on us weaken. The visions began to fade, the shadows retreating. But the real test was yet to come. A door appeared before us, pulsing with an otherworldly light. I knew somehow that this was our final challenge, our way out or our ultimate trap. "Whatever's on the other side," I said, my voice shaking, "we face it as one, no matter what." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with tears and determination. "Together," she whispered. Jack squared his shoulders. "We've got this," he said, sounding more like himself than he had in days. Emily looked up at us, a small, brave smile on her face. "Family forever," she said. As one, we stepped forward and opened the door. A blinding light engulfed us, and I felt the house's presence more strongly than ever. It pushed against our minds, trying to separate us, to break our bond, but we held firm. I don't know how long we stood there, fighting against the entity's influence. It could have been minutes or hours. But slowly, ever so slowly, I felt something change. The pressure eased. The light dimmed. And as my vision cleared, I saw our living room, our real living room, materializing around us. The house shuddered, its impossible geometries collapsing in on themselves. As the last of its influence faded, I heard what sounded almost like a sigh of relief. We stood there, still holding hands, hardly daring to believe it was over. But as I looked at my family, battered, exhausted, but alive and together, I knew we had done it. We had broken the cycle. The house was quiet now, just an ordinary structure once more. But as we stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal had changed us all. We had faced our deepest fears and come out stronger, together. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But what if the thing trying to kill you feeds on that very strength? As we turned to leave, the air around us began to thicken, and I realized our ordeal was far from over. The house shuddered violently, walls rippling like water. A deep, bone-rattling groan filled the air. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her close as the floor beneath us started to crack. "We need to get out now," I shouted over the noise. But as we ran for the door, it vanished before our eyes. The house wasn't letting us go without a fight. Shadows peeled off the walls, taking on horrifying forms. I saw every nightmare we'd faced, every fear we'd confronted, all swirling together in a maelstrom of terror. Emily screamed as a tendril of darkness wrapped around her ankle. Jack lunged forward, pulling her free. "Stay together," Sarah yelled, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Remember what we learned." She was right. We'd faced our fears once, we could do it again. I felt a surge of determination, of love for my family. The shadows seemed to recoil slightly. But the house wasn't done. The ceiling began to cave in, raining debris down on us. I shielded Emily with my body, feeling sharp pain as something struck my back. Jack helped me up, his face pale but resolute. "We can't keep running," he said. "We have to fight back." I nodded, an idea forming. The house feeds on fear, right? So let's give it something else to chew on. We formed a circle, hands clasped tight. I thought of every happy memory we'd shared in this home. First days of school, holiday dinners, quiet evenings watching movies. I felt the others doing the same, a warm glow spreading between us. The house's assault intensified. Ghostly figures lunged at us, wearing the faces of our worst fears. But this time we stood our ground. For every terrifying image, we countered with a moment of joy or love. "Remember Emily's first steps?" Sarah called out, her voice strained but determined. "Right here in the living room." The phantom attacking her flickered, losing substance. "Jack's 10th birthday party," I added, when we turned the backyard into a mini golf course. Another shadow dissipated. We kept going, each memory making us stronger, weakening the house's hold. The walls shook harder, cracks spreading across every surface. But now it felt less like an attack and more like desperation. Suddenly I understood. The house wasn't just trying to scare us anymore. It was fighting for survival. "It's working," I shouted. "Keep going." We poured everything we had into our bond, our love for each other becoming a tangible force. The air around us began to glow, pushing back the darkness. With a sound like shattering glass, the house's defenses crumbled. Light flooded in from outside, real sunlight. We stumbled forward, gasping, as the front door reappeared. We didn't hesitate. Hand in hand, we ran out onto the lawn, not stopping until we were well clear of the property. Behind us, the house gave one final earth-shaking groan. Then, before our eyes, it simply faded away, like a bad dream dissolving in the morning light. We stood there, panting and shaking, staring at the empty lot where our home had once stood. It was over. We'd won. But as the adrenaline faded, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Had we really destroyed the entity? Or had we simply helped it evolve into something new? Something that might be out there waiting for another family to test. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the warmth of my family around me. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. We were stronger now, bound by an experience that had nearly broken us but ultimately made us unbreakable. As we turned to walk away, I cast one last glance at the empty lot. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something. A shadow, or maybe a trick of the light. Then it was gone, leaving only questions behind. We'd escaped the house, but its shadows clung to us like a second skin. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding. Sure, I could hear whispers in the walls. Sarah jumped at every unexpected noise. The kids had nightmares that left them shaking and crying. We tried to move on, to rebuild our lives, but the experience had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand. We were closer now, more attuned to each other's fears and needs. But we were also more wary, always looking over our shoulders for the next impossible thing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flicker of movement, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. And I'd wonder, had we really escaped? Or had we just brought a piece of that nightmare world back with us? I tried to shake off these thoughts, to focus on our new life, our new home. But deep down, I knew the truth. Our ordeal wasn't over. It might never be over. Because some things once seen can't be unseen. And some doors once opened can never truly be closed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this chilling journey through A Strange House Appeared and the Feel Terrible Nightmares Followed. If the suspense kept you on the edge of your seat and the horror sent shivers down your spine, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales and heart-pounding stories that will keep you up at night. And don't forget to ring the bell icon so you never miss an update from us. We love hearing from our brave viewers. Share your thoughts, theories, or your own spooky experiences in the comments below. Who knows, your story might just be featured in our next video. Stay safe, stay spooky, and remember, beware of the shadows. Until next time.